In a world accustomed to accepting only the official version of history, few can imagine that under the sands of the Egyptian desert, for nearly 2,000 years millennia, texts lay dormant capable of transforming our understanding of Jesus' message. In 1945, peasants from the Nag Hammadi region in Upper Egypt, while digging for natural fertilizers, found sealed clay jars, kept with extreme care. Inside them, there were ancient codices, in leather and papyrus, containing dozens of manuscripts that had never been read by modern eyes. Among these writings was the enigmatic Gospel of Thomas, a text that until then only existed in rumors and controversial citations from ecclesiastical authors who condemned it as dangerous. This discovery was not just archaeological, but spiritual, as it brought to light voices silenced for centuries. These manuscripts forever changed the landscape of Christianity studied by academia and the faith lived by spiritual seekers. Until then, popular knowledge about Jesus was based on the four canonical Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. However, the discovery at Nag Hammadi revealed that, in the early centuries, many other testimonies circulated, each with its own tone, carrying nuances of thought, spirituality, and mystical experience. The Gospel of Thomas stood out, not for recounting miracles or narrating chronologies, but for gathering sayings attributed to Jesus in the form of short aphorisms, riddles, and invitations to inner awakening. This intrigued scholars and inspired seekers, as it seemed to offer a more intimate and challenging voice of the Master. The question that immediately arose was, why were these texts hidden? The mere fact that they were stored in clay jars and buried far from urban centers reveals that someone protected them from destruction. Over the centuries, with the consolidation of the institutional church, many writings that did not fit into the official theology were persecuted and condemned as heretical. Those who possessed them, to avoid persecutions or severe punishments, preferred to hide them, leaving them as a secret legacy for future times. The Gospel of Thomas, therefore, went through centuries of silence and oblivion, like a message in a bottle thrown into the ocean of time, waiting for someone to rescue it when humanity was ready to hear it. The mystery of these manuscripts also reveals something profound about the human being itself, our eternal quest for the hidden. There is a natural fascination for what has been suppressed, as if the truth had been purposely veiled for a select few. The idea that Jesus would have pronounced teachings reserved only for his closest disciples arouses not just curiosity, but also a sense of spiritual revelation. What has been hidden for so long could bring not only historical information, but also spiritual keys to a new way of living. This expectation increases the weight and relevance of the Gospel of Thomas. Interestingly, the Gospel of Thomas does not feature miracles, passion narratives, or resurrection. It focuses on concise wisdom that resonates as challenges to common understanding. It's a text that requires more than blind faith. It demands reflection, introspection, and the courage to confront profound questions. This aspect makes it as current as it is revolutionary. In an era saturated with ready-made answers, inflexible dogmas, and mechanical repetitions, Thomas invites us to dive into our inner selves and discover what the kingdom of God truly means. The discovery of these writings in the midst of the 20th century cannot be seen as a coincidence. Precisely at a time when humanity was seeking new forms of spirituality, amidst the decline of blind faith in religious institutions, a gospel re-emerges that places emphasis on self-knowledge and inner light. It arises in response to a silent call from millions who were not satisfied with superficial explanations, but yearned for a direct contact with the essence of Jesus' message. This recovery has the power of a reunion, as if history itself opened a portal for us to understand something forgotten but not lost. It's interesting to note that the first scholars who had access to the text were perplexed by its simplicity and depth. The Gospel of Thomas does not attempt to convince through elaborate theological arguments. It presents short sentences, often enigmatic, that require an active effort from the reader. This completely changes the relationship with the teaching, as there is no mediation from institutions, rituals, or dogmas. It's as if Jesus is speaking directly to the heart of each person, without intermediaries. This experience of direct contact is revolutionary because it breaks the dependence on external structures. To understand the magnitude of this discovery, we must remember that for centuries, the Church rigidly preserved the idea that only 4 Gospels were legitimate and inspired. The mere existence of others, such as that of Thomas, challenges this view and shows that the Christian faith was much more diverse and pluralistic in its early days. This plurality was reduced, pruned, and centralized over history, creating a single official version that came to be taught. When texts like Thomas resurface, they reveal not only the content itself, but also the history of the disputes, choices, and exclusions that shaped Christianity as we know it. This tension between the official and the hidden, between what was preserved and what was suppressed, gives the Gospel of Thomas a different aura of mystery and authority. It is not just another ancient text, it is a survivor, a voice that has withstood time and censorship. When reading it, we are not just facing words, but witnessing a struggle for spiritual truth. Each line carries the weight of a silence that has lasted for centuries, and each phrase sounds like a revelation meant to reignite an extinguished flame. And it is precisely this aspect of revelation that makes it so powerful today. In times of confusion, polarization, and the search for meaning, finding a gospel that speaks of inner light, self-discovery, and spiritual freedom is like receiving a map in the middle of a maze. It doesn't give us easy answers, but calls us to look within and recognize that the divine spark has always been present in every human being. This is the reason why the Gospel of Thomas continues to provoke, inspire, and challenge those who approach it with sincerity. The story of the Gospel of Thomas is, therefore, also the story of our own search. Just as the manuscripts were buried underground, so too our essence often gets buried under layers of fear, conditioning, and distractions. Finding Thomas is, in a sense, finding ourselves. It is a reminder that spirituality is not only in temples, but in the intimacy of an awakened heart. This metaphor makes the text even more relevant, as the act of unearthing the manuscript becomes a symbol of unearthing our own soul. With this, we reach a pivotal point. The Gospel of Thomas is not just an archaeological document, but a living call. It does not belong only to the past, but to the present and the future. Its presence today is like a key that opens doors to an authentic spirituality, free of impositions, but full of depth. As we embark on this journey, we need to be prepared for more than historical information. We need to open ourselves to an inner transformation. After all, this hidden gospel was not preserved in vain. It resurfaces to remind us that the true teaching of Jesus has always been closer than we imagined. In the first centuries after the death of Jesus, Christianity was not a single, centralized religion, but a mosaic of interpretations, beliefs, and spiritual practices spreading rapidly throughout the Roman Empire. Each community had its own way of understanding the Master's words, resulting in distinct traditions, sometimes complementary, sometimes conflicting. The Gospel of Thomas was born in this environment of plurality, where disciples and followers sought to preserve memories and teachings, transmitting them in various ways, without the concern for uniformity that would mark later times. It was a period when Christianity was in gestation, still without rigid boundaries between what was considered legitimate or deviant. Over the decades, however, this diverse landscape began to bother leaders who wished to consolidate the movement. As communities grew and spread, the need for unity, cohesion, and a centralized doctrine that could withstand external persecution while simultaneously establishing an internal identity became apparent. It was during this process of definition that many texts were excluded. Writings like the Gospel of Thomas, which emphasized personal experience and inner awakening, did not fit into the project of an organized and hierarchical faith, as they did not reinforce institutional authority, but rather the autonomy of the individual. Early Christianity was more pluralistic than is commonly thought today. Beyond the streams that would be labeled as orthodox, there were Gnostic, Ebionite, Marcionite groups, among others, each one advocating their own view on Jesus, his mission, and his message. The Gnostics, for example, saw salvation not as the result of an external sacrifice, but as the fruit of inner knowledge, gnosis, which freed the soul from ignorance and illusion. Within this context, the Gospel of Thomas was precious, as it offered sayings that echoed exactly this vision of self-knowledge as a spiritual path. This made it a dangerous text in the eyes of those who intended to standardize faith. The consolidation of the Church took place amidst intense disputes. In the 2nd and 3rd centuries, writers like Irenaeus of Lyons began to vehemently combat non-canonical Gospels, labeling them as heresies that led the faithful away from the true doctrine. Irenaeus argued that only 4 Gospels should be accepted, symbolically representing the 4 cardinal points and providing a stable foundation for faith. This choice was not only spiritual but also political. By limiting the recognized texts, the leadership gained control over the narrative of who Jesus was and what his mission was. By excluding writings like Thomas, the possibility of interpretations that strengthened spiritual independence was eliminated. The formation of the biblical canon, therefore, was not an innocent process, but rather a carefully planned selection, which favored texts aligned with the centralizing vision of the nascent church. The silence about Thomas and other Gospels is not due to their irrelevance, but exactly the opposite. They were too relevant, capable of offering an alternative view of Christianity, a view that did not require priests as intermediaries nor mandatory rituals to reach the light. This threat to the hierarchy was intolerable for an expanding institution, seeking order and submission. During the 4th century, with the conversion of Emperor Constantine and the official recognition of Christianity as the religion of the empire, the process of suppression became even more intense. Councils were organized to define doctrines and eliminate divergences. Christianity, which had until then been diverse, began to be shaped as a tool of power and political stability. Within this new order, there was no room for texts that encouraged individuals to seek the kingdom of God directly within themselves. The Gospel of Thomas was relegated to oblivion, and its memory survived only in fragmented quotations from authors who condemned it. The Church's silence regarding these writings was accompanied by a deliberate practice of destruction. Manuscripts were burned, libraries were emptied, and any literary production that did not fit within the established parameters was considered dangerous. This erasure was not complete only because some communities, aware of the spiritual value of these texts, hid them. This is how the Gospel of Thomas reached us, not because it was preserved by the institution, but because it was protected by those who saw in it a divine spark that could not be destroyed. This institutional silence had profound consequences on Western spirituality. By reducing Christianity to a limited set of texts and dogmas, a faith dependent on external authority was created, distancing believers from inner experience. The message of self-discovery and spiritual freedom, so clear in Thomas, was replaced by a hierarchical structure of obedience and conformity. This process shaped not only religion, but also the culture and mentality of the West, which for centuries associated spirituality with institutional submission. The interesting thing is that the Gospel of Thomas, upon being rediscovered in the 20th century, revealed exactly that which had been silenced: a spirituality based on direct experience, inner search, and awakened consciousness. This exposes the contrast between the spiritual richness of early Christianity and the impoverishment that occurred when diversity was stifled. The Church's silence did not eliminate these truths. It merely concealed them, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. When they came back to light, they brought not only historical information, but a living reminder of what had been lost. It is necessary to understand that the history of the Gospel of Thomas is not just the story of a text, but the story of a choice. The choice to favor unity over plurality, to place power above freedom, to build an institutional religion instead of preserving an open spiritual movement. This choice determined the direction of Western civilization, but the resurgence of Thomas allows us to revisit these decisions and reflect on alternatives. The Church's silence was not just about written words, but about the very possibility of an awakened and conscious humanity. Today, as we revisit this context, we realize that the Church's silence was, in part, a reflection of fear. Fear of losing control, fear that spirituality could not be managed, fear that inner freedom might threaten the established order. But this very silence ended up giving even more strength to Thomas's text, which, upon reappearing, carries the energy of something that survived against all odds. This return is, in itself, a testament that spiritual truth, no matter how much it is stifled, can never be completely destroyed. Silence, therefore, should not be seen only as absence, but as a pause full of meaning. For centuries, the Gospel of Thomas waited in the dark, protected by sand and clay, until the time came for it to be heard again. Now that it speaks once more, it not only echoes its original message, but also denounces the history of suppression and control that marked the formation of religion. With this, humanity has before it not only an ancient text, but a mirror reflecting our collective choices about faith, power, and freedom. Among the apostles of Jesus, some names have stood out over the centuries, such as Peter, John, and James, becoming central symbols of Christian tradition. However, there are figures that, despite their importance, were relegated to secondary roles by the official narrative. Thomas is one of these characters. Known as Didymus, which means twin in Greek, he is mentioned in the canonical Gospels at decisive moments, but always briefly and often shrouded in misunderstandings. The nickname of Doubting Thomas marked him in popular tradition, but this reductionist image does not do justice to the spiritual depth he carried. The Gospel of Thomas reveals a voice very different from that caricature, showing an intimate disciple, someone close enough to receive secret words from Jesus. The nickname twin has always intrigued scholars and mystics. There are no clear records about who Thomas's biological brother would be, and many suggest that the title had a symbolic meaning. In esoteric traditions, the term twin can indicate the one who is a reflection, the one who bears the closest resemblance to the Master. In this sense, Thomas would be the disciple who most faithfully reflected the spirit of Jesus, not only in obedience, but in profound understanding. This image contrasts with the widely spread idea of doubt. What is revealed, especially in the gospel attributed to him, is that of someone who sought to understand from within, someone who was not satisfied with superficial explanations, but desired to penetrate the mystery. The tradition of the Syrian Church preserved a different memory of Thomas. For communities in the East, he was not seen as a mere secondary apostle, but as a founder and missionary. Ancient accounts affirm that Thomas traveled to India, bringing the message of Jesus to distant regions, where he would have established Christian communities that survived for centuries. Even today, there are Christians on the Malabar coast who consider themselves direct descendants of Thomas's mission. This tradition gives the disciple a fundamental role in the expansion of Christianity beyond Roman borders, showing that his importance was much greater than recognized in the West. This mission in India is not just a pious legend, but finds echoes in historical documents, such as the Acts of Thomas, an apocryphal text that narrates his travels, miracles, and martyrdom in Eastern lands. Although filled with legendary elements, this writing reflects a living memory of communities that saw themselves connected to him. Thomas's presence in India transforms him into a universal apostle, capable of crossing cultures and connecting worlds. This image reinforces the idea that his spirituality was open, deep, and dialogued with diverse traditions. It is significant that the gospel bearing his name has so many similarities with Eastern spirituality, emphasizing inwardness, awakening, and enlightenment. The figure of Thomas also stands out in the canonical Gospels in crucial passages. In John, for example, it is he who, faced with the idea that Jesus would return to the Father, asks, "Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way?" This question opens the door for one of the most well-known responses. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Notice that without Thomas's question, this declaration would not have arisen. He is therefore the disciple who provokes revelations, who makes room for clarity. His doubt is not disbelief, but sincere search. It is a constructive doubt, which does not deny, but investigates, and in investigating, promotes revelation. The most famous episode, however, is the one where Thomas does not immediately believe in the resurrection of Jesus. He demands to see with his own eyes and touch the marks of the crucifixion. This attitude earned him the title of unbeliever, but upon a deeper reading, it shows the stance of someone who does not accept second-hand reports and desires a personal experience. For Thomas, faith could not be mere repetition, it needed to be lived. When he finally encounters the risen one, his declaration, "My Lord and my God," is one of the most powerful professions of faith in the entire New Testament. This detail shows that his demand to see and touch was not a lack of faith, but a search for authenticity. This quest is consistent with the spirit of the gospel that bears his name. The Thomas who questions, who demands, who investigates, is the same Thomas who preserves Jesus' sayings in the form of riddles, calling each person to find the truth for themselves. His spirituality is not based on blind acceptance, but on truly opening one's eyes. He represents the disciple who is not satisfied with ready-made answers, but insists on delving into the mystery, even if it means going against the current of the institution. In this sense, Thomas becomes a symbol of those who dare to go beyond, seeking not inherited faith, but lived faith. When we observe the Western tradition that reduced him to an unbeliever, we see a stark contrast with the Eastern view that celebrates him as a bearer of inner light. This difference is revealing. While one part of the church wanted to silence or minimize his figure, another preserved his memory as a missionary and wise man. This division reflects the tension between an institutionalized spirituality and an inner spirituality. The Gospel of Thomas, upon reappearing, recovers this forgotten dimension, showing that his doubt was merely the prelude to a deeper and transformative faith. The legends about Thomas also reinforce his significance. One of them claims that he was the spiritual twin brother of Jesus, sharing not just teachings, but essence. This idea, although symbolic, shows how he was seen as someone especially close to the Master. Another legend states that upon his death, he was buried in India, but his bones were transferred to Edessa, in Syria, where he became a venerated figure. These traditions suggest that his memory was never completely erased, surviving in distant communities, even if it was suppressed in the center of Christian power. This forgotten disciple teaches us a lot about the history of spirituality. He shows that true faith is not the absence of questioning, but rather the courage to ask. He shows that closeness to Jesus is not measured by blind submission, but by the sincere pursuit of understanding. And he also shows that the Master's message was not limited to the Roman Empire, but was carried to distant lands by those who carried the fire of the mission. In recovering Thomas, we also recover an essential aspect of Christianity: the freedom to investigate, the courage to experiment, the audacity to live faith authentically. The Gospel of Thomas, attributed to this disciple, is not just a text, it is a testament to his personality, his quest, and his experience with Jesus. It's as if each logion was the echo of the questions he asked and the answers he found throughout his journey. Therefore, understanding who Thomas was is also understanding the spirit of the gospel that bears his name. He was not the apostle of doubt, but the apostle of authenticity, the one who reminds us that faith is only true when it is experienced. This is the legacy of Thomas, the forgotten disciple who resurfaces to inspire a new generation. The Gospel of Thomas presents itself in a unique way among ancient Christian writings. Unlike the canonical Gospels, it does not tell the story of Jesus, does not describe his childhood, does not narrate miracles, does not detail the crucifixion nor the resurrection. Its structure breaks with the traditional narrative and focuses on a collection of sayings, aphorisms, and brief parables directly attributed to the Master. There are in total 114 statements that function more like spiritual enigmas than historical records. This form places it in a unique category, a gospel that does not intend to tell a biography, but to convey condensed wisdom intended to provoke the listener's consciousness. This enigmatic style creates a different relationship between text and reader. Instead of providing ready-made explanations, the logia of Thomas serve as keys that need to be turned in the mind and heart for inner doors to open. Some sayings are similar to those found in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but are presented in a more raw and direct form. Others, however, have no parallel in the canonical Gospels and sound profoundly original. This mixture suggests that the Gospel of Thomas preserves very ancient traditions, perhaps as ancient as those that gave rise to the known Gospels, but also incorporates layers of reflection characteristic of Gnostic spirituality. The absence of narratives is significant. This shows that the purpose of the text was not to recount what Jesus did, but to reveal what he said in his essence. It doesn't matter where or when each saying was pronounced, but rather its ability to provoke transformation. This structural difference shifts the emphasis from the external story to the internal experience. The reader or listener does not follow events, but is confronted with phrases that function as mirrors. The The question that the Gospel poses is, are you ready to see yourself in these words? Are you willing to discover the kingdom within you? One of the most fascinating aspects of the Gospel of Thomas is its emphasis on inwardness. Right at the beginning, we find sayings where Jesus asserts that the kingdom is not in heaven or in the sea, but within and outside of the human being. This inversion is radical compared to the expectation of many who were waiting for a future, external, political, or apocalyptic kingdom. In Thomas, the kingdom is a state of consciousness, a reality already present, accessible to those who awaken to it. This transforms spirituality into a personal journey of discovery rather than a passive wait for an external event. The text also presents the theme of self-knowledge as central. Jesus is portrayed saying that when a human being truly knows themselves, they will discover that they are the child of the living Father. This type of statement echoes universal mystical traditions, drawing close to teachings from the East, such as the Greek "Know Thyself" or the Enlightenment of Indian traditions. The focus is on revealing the divine spark that resides within each person, showing that salvation is not an external transaction, but an inner discovery. This view brings Thomas closer to Gnostic currents, but also engages with any seeker who values the direct experience of the divine. Another striking feature is the use of short parables and paradoxical images. There are sayings that speak of the light hidden within a lamp, of the mustard seed that becomes a large tree, of the child who holds the secret of the kingdom. These images are both simple and enigmatic. They invite reflection. They are not exhausted by a literal reading, and they open multiple meanings depending on the reader's state of consciousness. This pedagogy by enigmas is typical of spiritual masters who wish to provoke awakening, not just transmit information. At various times, the Gospel of Thomas emphasizes the idea that only those who have ears to hear will be able to understand. This reinforces the notion that it is not a text for the masses, but a teaching reserved for those who are prepared. This selective character explains why many considered it dangerous. It empowers the individual without the need for institutional mediations. Access to the truth depends on the personal willingness to listen and transform, not on external rituals or the authority of priests. The content of the Gospel also carries a challenging view of the world. In some sayings, Jesus asserts that earthly existence is like an illusion, and that true awakening consists of recognizing what is hidden beneath appearances. There is also an emphasis on abandoning duality, transcending divisions between male and female, internal and external, light and shadow. These ideas point to a spirituality that seeks unity, the reintegration of what appears to be separate. This brings it closer to Gnostic philosophy, but also echoes themes present in mystical traditions of various cultures. Compared to the Synoptic Gospels, Thomas appears to be closer to primitive orality. Many scholars believe that his sayings date back to very ancient sources, perhaps even prior to the writing of the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. This hypothesis gives the text immense value, as it may preserve the words of Jesus in their simplest form before they were wrapped in theological narratives. If this is true, then the Gospel of Thomas is not just another Gnostic writing, but a window into nascent Christianity, showing how the first disciples preserved the wisdom of the Master. Another relevant point is the absence of crucifixion and resurrection. For the reader accustomed to the canonical Gospels, this may sound strange, but it reveals the intention of the text. It is not about emphasizing external events, but about bringing total focus to the living message of Jesus. For Thomas, the essential is not how the Master died, but how his words continue to resonate within each human being. This omission does not deny the importance of the Passion, but shifts the attention to what can transform everyday life, here and now. The Gospel of Thomas also contains passages that seem contradictory or obscure. There are sayings about becoming like children, others that claim that he who finds the meaning of these words will not taste death, and still others that sound too harsh or enigmatic. This diversity of tones shows that we are not dealing with a systematic manual, but a treasure of fragments. The richness lies exactly in this openness. Each reader can find a different key. Each seeker can access the Gospel at different levels of depth. Thus, the structure of the Gospel of Thomas is an invitation. It does not guide step by step like a story, but it sows seeds. It's up to the reader to accept or not these seeds, to water them with reflection and allow them to bloom in their consciousness. It's a gospel that requires spiritual maturity, patience, and a willingness to dive into inner silence. Its greatness lies precisely in not offering easy certainties, but in provoking questioning that leads to transformation. This format sets it apart from any other Christian text and explains why it resurfaces with such strength in modern times, when many are seeking a freer, deeper, and more authentic faith. The Gospel of Thomas leads us to a rare and deeply transformative dimension of Jesus' teaching. Unlike the emphasis of the canonical Gospels on narrating miracles, parables, and events from the Master's public life, Thomas foregrounds the intimate vision that the kingdom of God is not a distant promise, nor a future construction, but a reality already present and accessible. The kingdom is within you and outside of you, asserts one of the most known logia, summarizing a revolutionary conception for its time and equally challenging for us. This statement shifts spirituality from an external horizon to an inner experience, making each individual responsible for awakening and recognizing the divine within themselves. This emphasis on the inner self places the spiritual quest on a completely different level. There is no longer the need for intermediaries, priests, or rituals to achieve the fullness of the sacred. Jesus, according to Thomas, is not a distant miracle worker who operates outside of the human being, but the guide who points inward to the discovery of the spark that already exists. It is at this point that the gospel takes on its most radical characteristic. Salvation is not achieved through accepted dogmas from outside in, but through the intimate revelation that each human being is capable of experiencing. This self-knowledge is the true gateway to a full life. The secret teachings of Jesus, preserved by Thomas, value the transformation of consciousness. He does not simply ask for moral behavior, nor does he suggest a list of commandments to mechanically follow. He calls on the human being to look with new eyes, to perceive what has always been hidden. If you make the inside like the outside, and the outside like the inside, then you will enter the kingdom, states another saying. Here we find the logic of integration, of overcoming the divisions we create in our minds. Wisdom is not in adding information, but in uniting what was separated, in recognizing the unity that has always existed. This teaching resonates with universal mystical traditions. The invitation to self-knowledge echoes the inscription of the Temple of Delphi in ancient Greece, "Know thyself," and resonates with Eastern masters who preach enlightenment as the fruit of introspection. The similarity does not imply copying, but reveals a universal truth that crosses cultures. Genuine transformation only occurs when the human being turns inward. The Gospel of Thomas shows that Jesus was not speaking only to first-century Jews, but to all of humanity in search of awakening. By highlighting the kingdom as an internal reality, the gospel dispels the illusion that spirituality depends on external circumstances. There is no need to wait for the end of times, nor to rely on cosmic signs or catastrophes to experience fulfillment. Life itself already contains the divine presence. This understanding has profound implications, as it positions each person as the protagonist of their spiritual journey. The encounter with the sacred is not outsourced, but lived directly. This vision empowers the individual and, for this very reason, was considered dangerous for religious institutions that sought to control access to the divine. Another central aspect of this secret teaching is the emphasis on awakening. Jesus, in Thomas, is not just the messenger, but the awakener of consciousness. His words are like sparks that ignite the dormant fire in the human heart. This awakening is not automatic nor easy. It requires a willingness to question, to abandon comfortable certainties, to break with illusions. It is a demanding process that confronts the ego and challenges attachment to appearances. That's why many logia sound like riddles. They are invitations to reflection, to inner silence, to the courage to see beyond the masks. The search for self-knowledge described in Thomas is not just psychological, but ontological. It's not about discovering preferences or memories, but about finding one's own essence, the divine spark that sustains existence. When Jesus says, "He who knows himself will find the Father," he is affirming that the true identity of a human being is not the limited ego, but the soul connected to the divine. This is a liberating teaching, as it breaks the chain of ignorance that keeps humanity bound to suffering and illusions. True knowledge is not intellectual, but experiential, a revelation that transforms the entire way of being. The Gospel of Thomas also suggests that this discovery is universal, not restricted to a specific group. Jesus' words are seeds sown on all grounds, hoping that each person will welcome them. This universality aligns the text with the longing of many spiritual traditions of all times, which see in humans the innate ability to awaken. There are no geographical, cultural, or religious borders that can limit this truth. It is a message that transcends eras and resurfaces strongly in our time, when so many are seeking an authentic spirituality, free from intermediaries. The secretive nature of teaching does not imply exclusivity in an elitist sense, but depth. It is secretive because it cannot be imposed from the outside. It can only be discovered from within. It is secretive because it requires preparation, openness, and courage. It is secretive because each individual must undertake their own journey. Jesus provides the keys, but each person must open their own door. This aspect makes the gospel not only mysterious but deeply personal. Each reader finds in it a different reflection according to their maturity and disposition. This focus on self-awareness also brings practical implications for everyday life. Recognizing the kingdom within oneself means living with more consciousness, more compassion, more authenticity. It means not seeking outside what is already inside. It means looking at others not as strangers, but as bearers of the same spark. This shift in perspective revolutionizes human relationships, as it dissolves divisions and stimulates fraternity. The kingdom is not just an individual mystical experience, but a new way of living in community based on awakened consciousness. Finally, this secret teaching preserved by Thomas invites us to make a choice. We can continue to wait for external signs, for future promises, for institutions to tell us what to do. Or we can look within and recognize that the source of life is already within us. This choice is challenging, but liberating. It places us before our own spiritual responsibility, before the possibility of living fully here and now. This is the heart of the Gospel of Thomas, to remember that the kingdom of God is not distant, but has always been present, waiting only for us to awaken to it. The existence of the Gospel of Thomas, with its emphasis on self-knowledge and the inner kingdom, posed a direct challenge to what was becoming established as Christian orthodoxy. In the early centuries, while various communities freely interpreted the teachings of Jesus, the movement to centralize faith was growing, seeking to unify beliefs, doctrines, and practices under a single authority. The emerging church recognized the need for cohesion, but this quest for unity would soon transform into a struggle for control, for the exclusive definition of what was legitimate. In this scenario, texts like that of Thomas were seen as a threat because they offered independent spiritual paths which did away with intermediaries and rigid structures. The emerging orthodoxy relied on the construction of a solid doctrinal body that could withstand the external pressures of the Roman Empire and the internal disagreements among Christian groups. This meant selecting which Gospels would be accepted and which would be condemned as heresy. The Gospel of Thomas, with its enigmatic language and focus on inner awakening, did not reinforce ecclesiastical authority, but pointed towards a direct experience with the divine. This spiritual autonomy was considered dangerous, as it jeopardized the authority of the bishops, the necessity of rituals, and the hierarchy that was being formed. The Church, in construction, saw in it not just an alternative, but a silent rival. The contrast between Thomas's message and orthodoxy is evident. While the Church emphasized the physical resurrection of Jesus as the foundation of faith, Thomas presented a Christ who reveals spiritual secrets capable of leading humans to eternal life within this existence. While ecclesiastical leaders constructed dogmas and creeds, Thomas suggested that truth cannot be imposed, but discovered within each individual. While institutional Christianity reinforced the need for submission to the community and the magisterium, Thomas called for a journey of individual self-discovery. This divergence of vision explains why the text was suppressed and why its return in the 20th century generated so much interest. The fight against so-called heresies was intense. Writers such as Irenaeus of Lyons, Hippolytus of Rome, and Tertullian dedicated their works to denouncing and refuting streams considered dangerous. They asserted that only 4 Gospels should be accepted, representing a symbolic number that conveyed harmony and completeness. All other texts were classified as forgeries, inventions of deviant groups. The Gospel of Thomas was included in this package, not because it lacked authenticity, but because its content questioned the centrality of ecclesiastical power. The strategy was simple: silence, destroy, and marginalize. As time went on, this conflict intensified. In the 4th century, with the support of Emperor Constantine, the Church gained official status within the Roman Empire, and orthodoxy was consolidated through councils. At these meetings, not only theological points were defined, but also which texts would be accepted as inspired. The Gospel of Thomas had no place in this new arrangement, because it did not support the necessary structures to maintain a state religion. It did not legitimize sacraments. It did not reinforce hierarchies. It did not advocate mandatory rites. On the contrary, it invited humans to look inward and find the kingdom within themselves. This incompatibility decreed its silence for centuries. The conflict between Thomas and orthodoxy reveals a lot about the course of spirituality in the West. By choosing only certain texts, the Church shaped a unique vision of Jesus, emphasizing his miraculous divinity, his atoning death, and his triumphant resurrection. These elements were powerful in consolidating collective faith, but they left aside the more intimate and philosophical dimension of the message. The Gospel of Thomas reminded that Jesus also spoke of inner enlightenment, self-knowledge, and transcendence of the ego. This dimension did not fit into institutionalized faith because it was not controllable. Orthodoxy then preferred to erase it from collective memory. This process of exclusion had consequences that still echo today. Over centuries, millions of Christians grew up without knowing that there were teachings attributed to Jesus that emphasized inner freedom. Spirituality became dependent on intermediaries, and direct contact with the divine was mediated by dogmas, sacraments, and rituals. This dependency consolidated the power of the Church, but at the same time impoverished the personal experience of faith. The conflict with Thomas was not just a dispute over texts, but a clash of worldviews. On one side, the centralization of religious power; on the other, the emancipation of human consciousness. It is notable that despite the efforts of destruction, the Gospel of Thomas has survived. This demonstrates that, even amidst repression, there have always been people who recognized its value and risked protecting it. The fact that it was found in Nag Hammadi, carefully preserved, indicates that there were communities that did not passively accept the imposition of orthodoxy. These dissenting voices did not completely disappear, but left silent marks, hidden memories that can only now be heard again. The resurgence of Thomas is, therefore, the victory of a memory that could not be completely erased. The conflict between Thomas and orthodoxy also sheds light on the power of narratives. The official story was written by the winners, but the existence of texts like this reveals that there were many other voices. Plurality was suppressed, but not destroyed. Today, by rediscovering Thomas, humanity can see that early Christianity was much richer, varied, and open than what has been conveyed over the centuries. This rediscovery invites us to reassess history not as a single block, but as a tapestry of diverse threads, some bright, others hidden. Ultimately, the conflict between the Gospel of Thomas and orthodoxy reflects the ongoing tension between freedom and control, between spirit and institution, and between personal experience and external authority. This tension does not just belong to the past, it remains alive today in all religious and spiritual traditions. The reappearance of Thomas's text reignites this discussion and invites humanity to reflect on how much we need intermediaries to find the truth. It reminds us that the conflict is not only historical, but also current, a constant invitation to choose between passive following or awakening on one's own. This is perhaps the greatest contribution of the Gospel of Thomas. It reveals that spiritual truth is never completely silenced. No matter how much institutions try to control it, it reemerges, finds new paths, reaches new hearts. The conflict with orthodoxy, far from being a defeat, demonstrates the strength of the message. If, despite centuries of silence, the gospel has reached us, it is because it carries within it a flame that cannot be extinguished. This flame continues to illuminate, provoke, and liberate those who are willing to listen to it. The Gospel of Thomas is not merely a relic of the past, nor a historical artifact meant to remain in museums or academic libraries. It emerges in our time as a living voice, laden with wisdom that deeply connects with the spiritual needs of the present. Throughout the centuries, humanity has oscillated between dependence on religious institutions and a thirst for direct experiences of the divine. Today, amidst crises of faith, disillusionments with traditional systems, and an ever-increasing search for authenticity, Thomas's words shine with a surprising relevance. His focus on the inner kingdom, on self-discovery, and on the awakening of consciousness resonates in hearts that yearn for something beyond empty rituals and superficial answers. One of the great lessons from Thomas for the present is the assertion that truth is not found outside, but within each human being. In a society saturated with information, distractions, and external stimuli, the invitation to look inward almost sounds like a revolutionary act. The modern world tends to scatter us, to fragment us, to make us believe that happiness and meaning are found in external achievements. Thomas reminds us that the treasure is hidden in our own field, that the kingdom already dwells within us, and that true awakening does not depend on accumulation, but on revelation. This message is a powerful antidote against the anxiety and chronic dissatisfaction that mark our time. The text also teaches us about the importance of silence and reflection. In a noisy, fast-paced, and impatient world, Thomas' enigmatic style invites us to slow down, to meditate on each word, to allow the mystery to transform us. It's not about consuming sentences like slogans, but about immersing ourselves in them, letting them echo within us until they bear fruit. This practice of contemplation directly connects with modern movements of meditation, mindfulness, and inner spirituality, showing that the gospel does not belong solely to Christianity, but converses with the entire human quest for full consciousness. Another precious lesson is the appreciation of personal experience. Religions have often turned into belief systems that demand unconditional acceptance, even without concrete experience. Thomas breaks with this logic by valuing the direct encounter with truth. He reminds us that it is not enough to repeat dogmas or participate in rites. One must experience for oneself. This emphasis returns to the human being the responsibility for their own spiritual journey. It is an invitation to maturity, authenticity, and freedom, values that become increasingly urgent in times of collective alienation. The hidden wisdom of Thomas also challenges us to overcome duality. In various sayings, we find the idea of making the inner like the outer, the masculine like the feminine, the light like the shadow, until everything unites. This teaching is profound because it touches the root of our divisions. We live in an era marked by polarizations, political, religious, social. Thomas's invitation is to transcend these fragmentations, to perceive the essential unity that lies behind differences. This lesson is vital for the present, as without this awareness of unity, humanity will continue to be trapped in endless conflicts. Another essential aspect is the call to awaken now. Many religious traditions place salvation as a future promise, something that will come after death or at a distant end of times. Thomas reminds us that transformation is possible here and now. Eternity is not just a distant horizon, but an accessible dimension in the present. This perception has profound practical implications, as it frees us from waiting and invites us to live consciously in the present moment. This is a lesson that resonates with Eastern philosophies and the growing appreciation of the here and now in various contemporary spiritual practices. Furthermore, the Gospel teaches us about the courage to question. Thomas himself, remembered as the one who did not accept second-hand reports, is a symbol of the search for authenticity. In times when so many voices vie for our attention, the lesson of questioning, of not blindly accepting, but of seeking personal experience, becomes indispensable. This attitude is not empty skepticism, but mature faith, which is not afraid to investigate and confirm. It is a spirituality that does not fear questions, because it knows that the truth withstands any sincere examination. The text also reminds us of the importance of simplicity. Many teachings speak of children, of seeds, of small everyday images that hide great mysteries. This simplicity is deeply relevant in an era of technological and intellectual complexity. The Gospel shows that wisdom is not in accumulating elaborate theories, but in living with clear eyes, in rediscovering lost innocence. This simplicity is not naivety, but purity of vision, the ability to see the extraordinary in the ordinary. This is a lesson that can transform the way we relate to life and others. Another contemporary lesson is the universality of the teaching. The Gospel of Thomas does not confine itself to cultural or religious boundaries. Its words can be read by Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, agnostics, or seekers from any tradition because they speak directly to the human heart. This openness is especially important in a globalized world where cultures meet and dialogue. The text reminds us that despite external differences, there is a common truth that unites all human beings: the search for inner light. This universality could be a path to interreligious dialogue and the construction of a more conscious and united humanity. Finally, the greatest lesson from Thomas for today is the reminder that the sacred is not distant, but close. It does not require grand temples, elaborate rituals, or complex dogmas. It only requires open eyes and an awakened heart. This closeness of the divine is a liberating message because it dissolves fear, dependence, and submission. It reminds us that every person already carries within them the presence of the kingdom, and that the role of Jesus' words is merely to awaken what already exists. This awareness, if fully lived, has the power to transform not only individuals, but entire societies. Therefore, the Gospel of Thomas is not just an ancient text, it is a compass for the present. It invites us to rediscover simplicity, authenticity, unity, and awakened consciousness. It reminds us that the kingdom is not a distant promise, but a living reality, accessible with every breath. Its lessons, hidden for centuries, now reveal themselves as treasures for a humanity in crisis, offering paths of healing, peace, and transformation. It is up to us to listen, reflect, and live this wisdom, allowing it to guide us to a new way of being. The Gospel of Thomas, emerging from the sands of Egypt after nearly 2 millennia of silence, confronts us with an essential question. Why were certain spiritual truths hidden, concealed, or deliberately silenced? The mystery surrounding this text is not limited to its content, but extends to its very trajectory of disappearance and reappearance. It is as if its absence had been planned, as if time needed to mature so that humanity was ready to hear its message. The enigma of the hidden truth is not only historical but spiritual and leads us to reflect on the value we give to what was suppressed and the reason why certain revelations are not offered to all immediately. Since the early centuries, the concealment of writings such as those of Thomas has been linked to the attempt to construct a single, stable, and controlled narrative about Jesus and his message. The plurality of voices was stifled in the name of institutional unity, and truths that could empower the individual were buried under the weight of orthodoxy. However, this concealment did not destroy the text, it merely safeguarded it. The fact that the manuscripts were placed in jars and buried with such care indicates a clear awareness that they should not be destroyed, but preserved for another time. This act of hiding is, in itself, a message. Not all truth can be revealed at any moment because there are times when the human heart is not ready to receive it. The enigma also shows us the dynamics of the sacred. Many spiritual traditions speak of veiled teachings, reserved only for prepared disciples. This selectivity does not mean arbitrary exclusion, but recognition that certain words, when misunderstood, can be distorted or trivialized. The Gospel of Thomas carries exactly this character. Its enigmatic phrases require spiritual maturity to be assimilated. Perhaps for this reason they were hidden, so as not to be reduced to empty slogans or manipulated by power interests. The secret, in this case, is a form of protection, not just of the text, but of the depth of the experience it conveys. At the same time, the enigma of the hidden truth reveals something about human nature itself. There is within us an irresistible attraction to the hidden, to mystery, to that which has been silenced. When we know that a teaching has been suppressed, it gains even more weight. It's not just about curiosity, but an intuition that what has been hidden contains something transformative. This attraction shows that humans sense there is more than what they have been told, that the official story does not exhaust the truth. The Gospel of Thomas thus becomes a symbol of this search for what is beyond the surface, for what challenges the established narrative. The enigma also sheds light on the relationship between power and spirituality. The fact that a text is considered dangerous shows how much it threatened authority structures. What could be so destabilizing in phrases that speak of inner kingdom and self-knowledge? Precisely the fact that, if taken seriously, they would free the individual from dependence on intermediaries. By rediscovering these words, we realize that spirituality can be lived directly without institutional control. This exposes a paradox. That which is simplest, most intimate, and most liberating was what needed to be hidden for so long. But the enigma of hidden truth is not just a historical phenomenon. It also repeats itself within us. Often we hide from ourselves what is most essential. We bury our intuitions, silence our inner truths, muffle the call of the soul under the weight of distractions and external demands. The Gospel of Thomas, in reappearing, functions as a mirror of this dynamic. Just as the text was buried in the desert, we also bury our own inner treasure. Unearthing the Gospel is symbolically unearthing our essence. The enigma is not only outside, but also inside, waiting to be revealed. The resurgence of Thomas in the 20th century, amidst profound cultural and spiritual transformations, suggests that humanity has reached a point where it can handle his message. After centuries of institutional faith, rigid structures, and religious crises, the time has come to seek a freer and more conscious spirituality. The enigma of concealment makes sense when we realize that the right time for its revelation is when there are prepared hearts. The secret was not forever, but for a time of collective awakening in which thousands would seek new ways to understand the divine. This enigma also challenges us to reflect on how we react to the truth when it is presented to us. Often we prefer the safety of established narratives, even if limited, over facing the radical freedom that truth brings. The Gospel of Thomas does not offer easy comfort. It demands personal responsibility. It requires courage to admit that the kingdom is within us. This demand can scare us because it implies abandoning dependencies and excuses. Therefore, the truth was hidden, not because it didn't exist, but because we are the ones who take time to fully accept it. The paradox of the hidden truth is that the more it is suppressed, the stronger it becomes. The silence of centuries did not erase the Gospel of Thomas, but transformed it into a symbol of resistance, a testimony that the human spirit will always find ways to preserve what is essential. Today, as we read its words, we find not only the sayings of Jesus, but also the echo of all those who risked their lives to protect them, who believed that their time would come. This echo connects us to a lineage of seekers who never accepted the complete extinguishing of the light. Thus, the enigma of the hidden truth becomes revelation. It shows us that nothing that is true can be destroyed forever. It can be stifled, silenced, buried, but it will always find a way back. The Gospel of Thomas is living proof of this. Its trajectory teaches us that the truth has its time, its season, its own way of emerging. And when it emerges, it does not come merely as information, but as an invitation, a call to awaken, to recognize the treasure buried within us and the world. This is the power of the enigma, not to provide us with easy answers, but to transform us through the mystery of its presence. Upon reaching the end of this long journey through the Gospel of Thomas, it becomes impossible to ignore the depth and audacity of its message. The text, born in a time of spiritual diversity and silenced by centuries of rigid orthodoxy, re-emerges in our time as an urgent invitation to inner transformation. More than a historical document, it is a living call, a voice that crosses time to remind us that true faith is not blind submission, but an awakening of consciousness. Jesus' call, echoing through the words preserved by Thomas, is not to wait for a distant kingdom, but to discover the kingdom that is already present, pulsating within each of us. The legacy of this gospel is one of free, mature, and profoundly human spirituality. It challenges us to abandon the illusions that imprison us and to recognize that the divine spark resides in our own heart. This perspective breaks the chains of dependency and returns to us the responsibility for our spiritual journey. It's not about rejecting traditions or despising communities, but understanding that, in the end, no structure can replace the direct experience of the divine presence. This is the call that spans the centuries, to embrace our condition as seekers and respond to the invitation to look within. The trajectory of the Gospel of Thomas, from its concealment to its rediscovery, is in itself a powerful symbol. Just as it was buried and forgotten for so long, we too bury our own essence, suppress our inner voice, and forget the spark that connects us to the infinite. The resurgence of the Gospel is a metaphor for our own awakening, a reminder that the treasure is never lost. It just remains hidden until we have the courage to unearth it. Thus, the story of Thomas merges with the story of humanity itself, called to remember what has always been present, but hidden by the veil of ignorance. The call of Jesus, conveyed by Thomas, is radical in its simplicity. It doesn't demand grand temples. It doesn't require complex rituals. It doesn't depend on intermediaries. It only asks that we awaken, that we see clearly, that we know ourselves. This simplicity is, at the same time, the greatest liberation and the greatest challenge. Liberation because it returns us to direct contact with the divine. Challenge because it takes us out of our comfort zone, demands personal responsibility, requires courage to abandon excuses and face the truth. It is easier to wait for someone to tell us what to do than to undertake the task of awakening on our own. Therefore, this message was considered dangerous, because it empowers every human being. However, it is precisely this empowerment that the modern world so desperately needs. In an era marked by crises of meaning, disillusionment with religious institutions, and a desperate search for authenticity, the Gospel of Thomas offers an alternative path. It reminds us that true spirituality cannot be imposed from the outside, but must spring from within. This lesson is crucial for a time when so many are seeking quick answers, yet forget that genuine transformation requires depth, silence, and the courage to look at oneself. Thomas's call challenges us to choose authenticity over superficiality. This calling also has collective implications. When each individual awakens to the presence of the kingdom within themselves, the way we relate to each other changes radically. Recognizing the divine spark in others dissolves divisions, breaks barriers, and creates a new form of coexistence based on compassion and respect. The inner kingdom is not just an individual experience, but the foundation for a renewed community where fraternity is not an abstract ideal but daily practice. Thus, the Gospel of Thomas does not invite us to flee from the world, but to transform it from within. The impact of this gospel in our time also occurs through the bridge it builds between traditions. Its words engage in dialogue with Eastern philosophies, with ancient teachings from Greece, with indigenous wisdom, and with modern spiritual movements. This universality shows that the message of Jesus, far from being confined to a single historical context, speaks to the human condition in its entirety. Thomas reminds us that truth is not the exclusive property of any religion, but the spiritual heritage of all humanity. This is a call to unity, to overcoming boundaries, to rediscovering what unites us in essence. Another profound aspect of this call is the invitation to have the courage to question. Thomas, remembered as the disciple who doubted, symbolizes the pursuit of authenticity. His doubt was not rejection, but a thirst for real experience. Similarly, the gospel that bears his name teaches us that there is no true faith without investigation, without questions, without the courage to face the unknown. This call is especially relevant in a time when many are afraid to question for fear of losing their faith. Thomas shows us that questioning does not destroy faith, but strengthens it, because it transforms it into living experience. We thus arrive at the heart of Jesus' call through Thomas, awakening to the truth that is already within us. It's not about waiting for an external miracle, but recognizing the continuous miracle of life, the constant presence of the sacred in every breath, in every gesture, in every encounter. This call is eternal, always current, always alive. It resonates today as it did 2,000 years ago, because the human need for meaning, transcendence, and awakening has not changed. The Gospel of Thomas is a reminder that we have never been separated from the divine. We simply forgot. This call invites us to a choice. We can continue to live distracted, trapped by dogmas, conditioned by external narratives, or we can dare to look within, listen to the silent voice that dwells in us, and respond to the Master's invitation. This choice is personal, non-transferable, but also transformative. Each individual who awakens contributes to the collective awakening. Each heart that recognizes the kingdom within itself illuminates the world around it. This is the silent revolution that the Gospel of Thomas proposes. Not a change imposed from the outside, but a transformation that begins within and spreads like light. Thus, we conclude this journey not with a full stop, but with a starting point. The Gospel of Thomas is not just a text to be studied, but an invitation to be lived. Jesus' call through Thomas continues to echo, asking us not only to listen to it, but to put it into practice, to awaken, to know ourselves, to find the kingdom within us and manifest it in the world. This is the great revelation, the great secret, and the great promise. The kingdom of God is not far away. It is already here, just waiting for us to open our eyes to see it. And now, mind unfettered, after journeying together through the mystery of the Gospel of Thomas and touching the deep layers of Jesus' secret teachings, I want to hear from you. If the kingdom is truly within us, how do you feel this discovery could transform your life today? Share your reflections in the comments, because when each of us expresses our perception, we are co-creating a space for collective awakening, an expanding field of consciousness that grows ever stronger. Your voice is part of this movement, and it inspires other seekers who are on the same path. And don't stop here, because the next step of our journey is already before you. Click now on the video that appears on your screen and come with me to unravel the hidden prophecy of the three veils, what only the truly awakened can see. A direct continuation of this dive, where we will reveal even deeper mysteries that only those who are truly awakening can understand. You are part of this community of seekers, you are mind unfettered, and together we continue to expand consciousness, discovering hidden truths and manifesting a new reality. So, leave your comment, share your vision, and see you at the next revelation.